Good morning, ChurchOne. Good to be with you this morning. And I just want to say, if you're watching these videos, it's wild to think that it's been 2 years since we started doing these. And I've had the opportunity to preach about a dozen times now at ChurchOne. I've been so grateful for it. And I just want to say, on behalf of ChurchOne, if you're watching this, and it has been 2 years since you've been a part of this, or maybe you're out of town this Sunday, but I want you to just hear that we really miss you. And, ChurchOne is not the same without you. And I'm saying this as just a fellow member, that we look forward to you coming back and being with us eventually. And we love you and we miss you. And so I'm going to share a story with you briefly to get the sermon started. So part of my job every year is I go and help run a summer camp for young people in different parts of the country, and I'm kind of like one of the MCs. I kind of help run the games and the humor. And there was one year that we had a group of students from Spain. And for one of the games, we called it the Sprite Remix Challenge. And we would call students up, and what we would do is we would pick a category, and we'd give them the category, and then they had to name something that belonged in that category. And if they repeated something or froze up, then they would get a 2-liter Sprite Remix explode all over their face, and that's just how it went. And we called up one of the students that we called up for this game. We called up 7 people, and one of them was a student named Roberto from Spain. And when he came up, I asked him if he wanted his translator to come up, and he said, no translator. We said, okay. And not thinking about it at first, when I introduced what the first category was, because this is what we usually do because it's pretty easy, I say, all right, the first category is States of America. Okay, and immediately as soon as I say it, people in the crowd are like, oh, come on, because I didn't think about Roberto. And I was like, oh yeah, sorry, that's messed up. Okay, and I had to calm people down. I said, you know what we'll do? We'll do colors, okay, colors. And I was like, okay. And so, and I look at Roberto, I go, colors. He's like, okay, gives me thumbs up. And then we start round 1, all right, go. And we pass the microphone. It's like blue, orange, red, green. We get to Roberto, he goes, Texas. And the whole crowd just started dying laughing. And he had no idea what just happened. He thought we were doing states still. And it was one of those moments. It was just, we get 500 students from different cultures, different parts of the country, parts of the world together and just laughing. And Roberto was a celebrity for the rest of the week. And a few days later, he stood up and told everyone, my name is Roberto, I'm from Spain, and this week I've made the decision to put my faith in Jesus. And I remember talking to Roberto after that and just being so honored that I could be a part of that. And I've had the opportunity to see a lot of students make that first decision to give their faith, put their faith in Jesus. And from being around long enough, and that's actually part of my story, I stood up at a Young Life camp, and that's where I heard the gospel for the first time. But I've learned now that's not the finish line. That's not like yes, we got them to pray that prayer or make that decision. That's really just the beginning. Because for me, I made that decision, but as I went to college and I went to live and grow and live my life, I really started to wrestle with this kind of double life thing, where when I would go to college, when I went, I was partying and drinking and doing all that stuff, but I was also still going to Bible studies. I knew I wanted the Christian life to be a part of my life. I just wasn't ready for it to, be everything that I did or keep me from having fun. And then after a series of decisions that I made one night that just left me feeling so ashamed, and not only ashamed of what I did, but concerned about the person that I was becoming. And so I remember that night, really, and it was the next morning, kind of deciding, you know what, and I didn't have the vocabulary for it, I probably wouldn't have put it this way, but saying, Jesus, I'm ready for you to be the Lord of my life. I'm ready for you to not just be a part of me that I just put on my Christian version of me when I'm around other Christians, or something that I just know is the right thing to do. I want you and my faith in you to actually impact the way that we live, or the way that I live. And that's really what the passage that we're going to be looking at is about. It's a story of a woman who has made Jesus the Lord of her life. And I want to read it, and then we're going to ask the question, how did she get there? Like this, you're going to see Mary has such close intimacy with Jesus. How did she get there? And then also, how would we describe a life that has made Jesus the center of it? So we're going to read from John chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of her perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. But he did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she would save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. It's the word of the Lord. Okay, so to give you some context of this passage, all right, Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and this is Mary, the sister of Lazarus. And in the chapter 4, in John chapter 11, Jesus had showed up to Bethany where Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. And he came into Bethany and he raised Lazarus from the dead. This passage is recorded in Mark and Matthew, so we know from those other accounts that they're at Simon the leper's house, a man who had leprosy and been healed by Jesus. And Mary comes in with a jar of pure nard, this expensive perfume, and she pours it on Jesus' feet. This probably would have been the most valuable asset that she had. And she comes in and she lets her hair down and wipes her hair on Jesus' feet. That would have been a scandalous statement because in that culture, a woman would have never let her hair down in front of any man other than her husband. But she clearly comes in and people are like, wait a second, that thing is worth way too much money. Hold on a second. What, she's letting her hair down like that. There's all sorts of objections that are happening in this room right now. And Mary is clearly showing no regard for how much this stuff costs. She doesn't care how expensive it is. She doesn't care how much it's costing her. And she doesn't care about what other people are saying about her as she does this. All she cares about is the person in front of her, is that Jesus is worth all of her adoration, that Jesus is Lord of her life. And this is the most drastic level of intimacy that she can show. And so how did she get to this? How is she getting to showing such a strong level of affection? What led her here? I think that as we look at that and ask that question, that is kind of an American way to look at the Bible, isn't it? It's like, okay, tell me how I can get that kind of intimacy with Jesus. Like, if I do A, B, and C, then I'll have the relationship with God that I really want to have. And ultimately, we can't just look at a passage and say, okay, what did Mary do so that I can do the same thing, so that I can get to the same place? Because it's the work of the Spirit. Right? Like if you think about a plant, you can water it, you can put it in good, healthy soil, you can put it in a place to get sunshine, but ultimately it's God who's going to make that plant grow. And anytime something grows, it's a miracle of the Lord. And I think similarly, there are things that we can do. There are disciplines that we can make a part of our life. There are truths that we can remind ourselves of that put us in a better position and posture that make it more likely for us to grow with Christ. But ultimately, our growth is something God has got to do by His Spirit. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion, is in Philippians 1:6. And so with the recognition that it's not us who can grow ourselves, it's God's Spirit, I do think it's worth talking about what are the things that better position us, and what did Mary do that positioned herself to trust Jesus the way that she was. So the first thing that I want to point out is that she remembered what He had done in her life. Remember, in the chapter before, she had just witnessed her brother come back to life, dead for 4 days. And the miracle was fresh. And so she's giving this offering out of gratitude and how she had seen her brother's life transformed. Have you ever witnessed God transform a person's life? How has God shown up in your life? Has he changed you? Something that, what has led you to watching this sermon right now? God has clearly done a work in you, and there was a time in your life where for the first time this made sense to you. Do you remember that? I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of what God has done in our lives to bring us to where we are, because we have such short memories. If you look at the Exodus, like the Israelites are rescued in such an amazing way. The Red Sea stops flowing and they pass on dry land and they go. And once they get to the other side, fleeing from the Egyptians, they look across and they see the Egyptians in their whole cavalry chasing them down. And they start to cross on the same ground. And as soon as they're in the path of the water, the Red Sea comes and sweeps them away. And then it's just a few days later, as they've been saved from slavery, that they are grumbling to Moses, saying, "Oh, don't we have any food out here? Like, wouldn't it be better if we were just back in Egypt?" And Moses is like, "You were enslaved. Remember the God who rescued you." Like, how short are your memories that you would give up on this so quickly? And I think that we do the same thing. We get so overwhelmed and busy with what we have in front of us that we quickly forget how faithful God has been. And Mary remembers. And it's part of the reason that she can lean in with such deep intimacy. One of the criticisms of Christianity is how we talk about that we are sinful. But that, because, and this is a close friend of mine, when we talk about faith, says, I don't like Christianity. I don't like how negative it is. You guys always talk about how selfish we are and how sinful we are. And it's not so much negative as much as it is just stating reality. This is the nature of who we are. And thank God that every one of us have been rescued by a God who loves us. That in midst of our sinfulness, in midst of our selfishness, he says, that doesn't disqualify you from my affection, right? That when we were still entrenched in sin, that while we were objects of wrath, God, who loves us, sent his son to rescue us. God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. I had to remind myself of who I was in college, and I got to look every once in a while back at that and say, man, imagine if God didn't intervene in my life. Imagine if he didn't put a few people in my life to remind me of his goodness, or put something in my spirit to make me not be attracted down that road. I'm so thankful for it, because I don't know where I'd be. And I look at my life now with my family, with my job, like all sorts of things. I can say, Lord, you're so good to me. So let that be empowering to remember how God has been faithful to you. Secondly, something that I think leads her to this powerful statement of Jesus being the Lord of her life is that she understood what kind of Lord he was. Jesus says in the midst of the criticism that others are showing her, he says, she's preparing me for burial. You see, what he's saying is Mary has paid attention. As they're going to Jerusalem, as they're getting ready for this, and they're only 6 days out from Jesus being arrested, Jesus is saying, she's paid attention as I've predicted what is going to happen. See, several times Jesus has said, when I get up there, I'm going to be betrayed, and I'm going to suffer at the hands of sinful men. I'm going to be killed. And the disciples just didn't get it. In fact, one time, Peter even said, no, that's not going to happen. He rebukes Jesus, and he says, I'm not going to let that happen. You're not going to suffer. And Jesus responds, he says, get behind me, Satan. You see, Peter, because this is why I came. I came to rescue and save the people that I love. And if you are in the way of me doing that, then you are actually not on the side of good, you're on the side of evil. And so get out of the way if that's what you're going to try to stop. But Mary understood it. She understood that Jesus was getting ready to sacrifice himself. And when the Lord of your life has sacrificed himself, and then we know and understand that sacrifice comes with following him. So how did Mary get to this point of intimacy with Jesus? I think she remembered what Jesus had done, and I think she knew what kind of Savior he was as she had her eyes on the cross, as she knew he was about to rescue her. Now, what does it look like to make Jesus the Lord of your life? Like, what does that life look like? Well, she freely dumped out her most prized possession. Now, this is kind of hard for us to relate to because I don't think any of us have perfume that's worth, a whole year's wages, which is what this was worth. And even if we did, I'm not saying that that's what Jesus wants us all to do, is to go take our yearly salary and throw it in the fire and say, that's for you. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think the point is that Jesus didn't have to ask her to do that. He never did ask her to do that because he already had her heart, not just her mind. You see, often we look at Jesus as someone that will just tell us what to do, how to be a good Christian, what we're supposed to do. And, it's a good idea to have Jesus be a part of our life. But when Jesus is the Lord of your life, he doesn't just captivate your head. He captivates your heart, and he captivates your will. If you notice the reaction of Judas in comparison to her, Judas says, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? And it says he didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. You see, Judas is serving Jesus. And as the treasurer appointed probably by Jesus, he would help himself from what was put in. And he probably thought to himself, well, I'm working pretty hard. I deserve a little extra bonus, so I'm going to take this. Judas was a disciple too. He saw miracles. He saw people healed. He fed the sick. The problem was that Jesus was not the Lord of Judas's life. There was something else that had captivated Judas's heart more so than Jesus. You see, Judas had stuck around long enough to want to hear him and see him do some amazing things. He had captivated his head. He hadn't captivated all of who Judas was. You see, Judas worshiped money and success. And so while Mary was looking at Jesus and her faith in Jesus as a relationship, an intimate relationship, Judas thought of it more of a religion. Of, okay, I'll do what I'm supposed to do, but what am I going to get out of it? So, isn't Christianity a religion? Well, yes it is, but it's different than any other world religion. See, religion traditionally asks the question, what do I have to do to get to God? And the Christian faith says this is what God has done to get to you. Religion says if you obey, then you will be accepted. The Christian faith says you are already accepted as a son or daughter with all of your imperfections. Now that you are a son or daughter and you've been given this new identity, let me show you how you can live like one. When Jesus is the Lord of your life, it changes the way you see God's commandments. You don't look at it as, when Jesus is just a religion, the thought process is, what do I have to do? Tell me what good Christian things I have to do so I don't feel guilty. What the Christian faith says is make Jesus the Lord of your life, and all your guilt is removed freely. And because God loves you and he invented life, here are the commands that if you want to get the most out of your life, if you want to experience Jesus fully, then you will obey the commands and you'll dive deeper into them. Zacchaeus is a great example of this because he was a criminal. He got rich by ripping people off, and he had the backing of the Roman government to do it. And one day, Jesus calls him by name and says, come on, let me go have dinner with you. And people say, wait a second, doesn't Jesus know that he's gone to have dinner with a sinful person? And then Zacchaeus comes forward and he gives away, says, if I've ripped anybody off, I'm giving it back 4 times the amount. And I'm going to give half of what I owe to the poor. Now, if Jesus was a religious Jesus, then he might come to Zacchaeus and say, now Zacchaeus, you've really ripped off a lot of people. So pay them all back, and then I can hang out with you and we can go have dinner at your house. But he doesn't do that. He calls him by name. He says, Zacchaeus, you are accepted as is. All of the debt that you have, everything that you've done wrong, I'm going to pay for that, so you don't have to worry about it. You're already accepted. Let's go hang out. And what's Zacchaeus' response? His response is to do way more than the law even requires. You see, when you're bound by and look at your faith as just a religion, the way Judas did, it's like, all right, I'll do what I'm supposed to do, but what am I going to get out of it? But when Jesus is the Lord of your life, you already recognize He's given me everything that I have. How can I fully honor Him and love Him with what He's given me? How can I love the people that He's put in my life? And not what's the minimum of what I'm supposed to do. As you look at Mary and what she did, it's overt and extreme generosity. She's freed. She's secure in who she is, so she's able to be passionate in her faith and in her response to Him. So Mary is making this sacrifice, and people are grumbling and criticizing, and she's not worried about what anybody else is saying. One of the saddest verses in the Bible is when Jesus is before Pilate, and Pilate says, he keeps saying, I can't find anything against this man. But it says, wanting to satisfy the crowds, he hands Jesus over to be crucified. I hope that you do not make your decision on what your faith looks like based on what the crowds say. What do you think about Jesus? Is Jesus the Lord of your life? The last reference, and I know I've used a lot, that I want to throw out there is this beautiful passage when Jesus is asked. They try to set a trap, and they say, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he says, well, whose inscription is on it? They say Caesar. And he says, well, then give to Caesar what's Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And they don't ask him any more questions. They don't try to trap him after that. Because they look at it and it's like, okay, if the inscription has Caesar's, I guess we give Caesar what has his inscription on it. The question is, what has God's inscription on it? And there's one thing in the history of creation that was created with God's inscription, and that's me and that's you, made in the image of God. So if we give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's, entrust Him with your entire heart. Entrust Him with your life. Make Jesus the Lord of your life, not just your Savior, not just that time that you stood up and said, I want to make Jesus, I want to put my faith in Jesus. Like, that's a beautiful moment, and you should remember that. But He wants so much more, and He's trustworthy to give more. And you can come to Him in security and passionate to say, Lord, what do you want to do with my life? And it's then we get to experience the freedom and the safety and the fullness of what He has to offer. So, ChurchOne, the charge is to make Jesus the Lord of your life this week. God bless, and we'll see you around.